So far basically जब हम इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड की बात करते हैं तो we deal with the idea of specialization based on the absolute and comparative advantage. Once we've decided who's going to make what, we do tend to talk about that if a country is specializing in something, it gets certain advantages in terms of greater output or in terms of employment is created as a result of that. So there are certain advantages and disadvantages because of specialization. We sort of link that idea of specialization. Sometimes they specifically ask you like दो questions अभी तक आए हैं which is dealing with the idea of free trade. Okay. And obviously, the opposite of free trade is protectionism. So, question can be a combination of the two. We'll go a little bit more in detail with what protectionism is about. But पहले हम free trade का idea देख लेते हैं. ठीक है. So, free trade का जो simple सा concept है, that is when countries trade with each other without any kind of barriers. ठीक है. That's the key definition. Okay, so again, ये question आया November 24 variant 21 for an 8 marker where it says explain the potential advantages of free trade. So पहले 3 mark knowledge and understanding is about the advantage. In my opinion, the first thing what you should do is you should briefly define what is free trade. And I think it will be fair to say that, that there is no trade barriers slash protectionism. Okay. That means there's no tariff, there's no taxes, goods can freely move between countries. अगर मैं Bamford say, if I would read out कि free trade क्या होता है, so free trade is the exchange of goods and services across national border without any government restrictions. I think that would be an ideal one to write. And free trade exists when countries के ऊपर किसी किस्म का tariff नहीं होता, कोई quotas नहीं होते, कोई limits नहीं होती on import and export. So obviously there are other types of protectionist policies, which we'll discuss in a bit. My question is about three advantages to specialization. One is when countries specialize when countries free trade and they specialize, the first advantage you get is there is an increase in world output. And I think you should explain that why does that happen? And it happens because when country specializes and focuses on a particular good or a process, then obviously there is going to be more goods and services produced. फिर उसके बाद obviously जब आप trade करते हैं तो countries get to have more variety of goods and services, right? More variety, improved quality, so we can write about that also. फिर उसके बाद I think जब आप trade और specialization करते हैं and you tend to produce more output, I think it would be fair to say that you can generate more employment, and this more employment leads to higher incomes, and which eventually leads to your standard of living kind of like going up, right? तो ये भी इसका एक basically एक result निकलता है. ठीक है, सो ये आप इसके अंदर बात कर सकते हो। आई थिंक देर आर मोर थिंग्स दैट यू कैन राइट यहाँ पे, क्योंकि थ्री की बात हो रही है, तो दैट्स व्हाई आई एम जस्ट राइटिंग थ्री ओवर हियर। But you can definitely discuss uh, more things over here also. Something along the line के balance of payment improve हो जाती है because you tend to export. Why? Because जब आप specialize करके sell करते हो तो you get bigger markets, so आप large scale production करते हैं, your cost cuts down, आपका workers अच्छा skillful हो जाता है, ज़्यादा productive हो जाता है, government tends to make a good reasonable amount of money. So there's a lot of positive things that can happen as a result of it. So they're asking for three. तो हमने basically वो three यहाँ पे reasons दे दिए हैं। ठीक है, and then it says consider whether such advantages are always greater than the potential disadvantages. So that means now we have to explain. This seems more like a 12 marker. I don't know why ये 8 marker के ऊपर भी दिया है इन्होंने, but it's more like a 12 marker because जो March 2025 में आया है question, that's a 12 marker. So उसमें यही चीजें लिखनी है, but then उसकी जो checking है वो थोड़ी सी levels के अंदर है with your advantages and your disadvantages. So if I was to give certain disadvantages of this, so we would write, अच्छा जी, डिसएडवांटेज क्या हो सकते हैं? वैसे तो वी हैव टू गिव स्पेशलाइजेशन के काइंड ऑफ लाइक disadvantages, right? So one of the major disadvantage we have is when we are specializing in one type of a product. So we say that there is an over reliance on trade or specialization of one good, and if the world substitutes it, then country faces many problems. Now, obviously, the problems is to do with unemployment. एक तो सबसे बड़ा मसला वो आ जाता है that you have that of an issue. उसके अलावा जब आप ये कर रहे होते हैं तो there is a possibility of you could say like resource depletion, because you sort of like speed up on that. Um, Reliance on imported goods, especially if country faces trade deficits or something like that. जैसे पाकिस्तान का केस है, heavily relying on imported goods, तो वो obviously issue हो जाता है. Um, Sometimes what happens is when we're specializing on particular type of an industry, unfortunately, what happens is the other industry sort of gets neglected. ये हमने देखा है कि this creates a lot of problem for many economies because when that industry dies, you basically don't have a backup industry because आपने बहुत ही ज्यादा जो है एक particular industry के ऊपर focus किया हुआ होता है. एंड देन द अदर इंडस्ट्री आहिस्ता आहिस्ता से वो रन डाउन हो जाती है, एंड देन उसमें कोई कभी अपग्रेडेशन ही नहीं आई होती हैं. तो इवेंचुअली वक्त के साथ जो है फिर वो इंडस्ट्री, व्हेन यू नीड इट टू स्टेप अप, इट नेवर डज, एंड देन यू गेट योर बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट प्रॉब्लम्स एंड ऑल अलोंग विद इट. तो आई थिंक ये उस पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से ये एक आइडिया है इसका कि फ्री ट्रेड के जहां पे आपको एडवांटेजेस मिलते हैं वहां पे थोड़े से डिसएडवांटेजेस का भी इशू होता है. Um, as far as the valuation goes, कि फ्री ट्रेड के जो एडवांटेजेस हैं, are they always greater than the potential disadvantage? I think like you can do evaluation on this one, but अगर हम देखते हैं countries, I would like to break it down into like developed or developing, because उसके अंदर हमारा एक डिस्कशन आ जाता है कि किस तरीके से जो डेवलपिंग होती हैं वो ज्यादातर, द इशू विद डेवलपिंग इज कि वो प्राइमरी, उसके ऊपर बहुत ज्यादा उनकी रिलायंस होती है, राइट? सो हमारी जो डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज होती हैं, दे रिलाई ऑन प्राइमरी sector, and primary sector tends to be cheap in value. तो अनफॉर्चुनेटली कंट्रीज जहां तक उनके एक्सपोर्ट्स रेवेन्यू है, उसकी जो इनको रेवेन्यू मिलता है, एक्सपोर्ट्स का रेवेन्यू, दैट टेंड्स टू बी मच मोर स्मॉलर, एंड there is very high competition because there are more developing countries than developed countries. So there is high competition, which leads to even low prices and very, vulnerable position. जहां तक developed economies की बात होती है, they are usually dealing with secondary and tertiary sectors, and these are mostly high value goods. तो अब उसमें क्या होता है कि ये जो डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज होती हैं, for them, because they need these tertiary and secondary goods, unfortunately, their import expenditures are usually on the high side, where the developing countries वो usually struggle ही करती हैं, right? So इनके लिए बड़े problematic situation होती है, and it's hard for them to survive in this entire पूरी situation. तो उसके अंदर हम कह सकते हैं कि जो एडवांटेजेस हैं, दे आर नॉट ऑलवेज favorable to them. But what we've seen is that at least for starting point, usually developing countries की starting point के अंदर, it is helpful to get them going until they find their comparative advantage, and and then they can improve on goods and services and improve their labor and uh, capital and all of that, and that sort of like brings improvement to their पूरी situation. अच्छा, इसी तरह का हमारे पास एक जो क्वेश्चन मार्च के अंदर आया था, लेट मी जस्ट शो यू दैट वन आल्सो. Let's take a look at that.
Should
Second one.
developing and developed come in valuation?
I think you can talk about it. Because advantage versus disadvantage लिखना है ना, कि क्या advantage is always greater than the potential disadvantage. So I think you can create any kind of discussion. I think it should be perfectly fine to do any kind of discussion here. I think developing argument would be perfectly fine. No problem whatsoever, Usman.
Then you repeated an evaluation.
So my evaluation, which I did, I was saying that developed versus developing के अंदर, we know that developing countries usually are selling cheap primary raw materials to the developed economies, right? तो वो जो developing countries होती हैं वो vulnerable होती हैं because number one, they're selling cheap stuff, and number two, there are a lot more other countries which are selling similar things. So developed countries get more say in what should be the value be. तो ऐसी सिचुएशन के अंदर द डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज कैन इजीली मूव अवे फ्रॉम वन कंट्री टू द अदर. तो उसके अंदर जो डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज होती हैं, दे आर ऑलवेज इन अ कॉम्प्रोमाइजिंग स्टेट. सो जो एडवांटेज उनको मिलना होता है, the disadvantages of getting exploited happens with them very often. और जो डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज होती हैं वो बिकॉज सेकेंडरी और टर्शरी चीजें बेच रही होती हैं तो प्राइमरी सेक्टर इज यूजुअली डिपेंडेंट ऑन देम एंड they're not, they don't, and these are high value goods that they are usually selling. तो डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज अनफॉर्चुनेटली जो है उनसे हाई प्राइस के ऊपर खरीदती हैं एंड देन दे फेस ऑल दीज काइंड ऑफ बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट इश्यूज and you know uh, to deal with those they have to then borrow and even bigger problem comes along with it. So my overall conclusion for that would be that developing countries के लिए free trade does not work in their favor, although it does generate employment for them. Okay. But it mostly benefits the stronger developed economies because they already have comparative advantage. तो इस तरीके से मैं डेवलप्ड और डेवलपिंग के अंदर डिस्टिंक्शन लाना चाहूंगा.
Can you bring in exchange rate and current account balance?
um exchange rate and current account balance. Current account balance के अंदर as long as you can explain कि once they get big then the country faces risk in terms of uh, any kind of problems that they're going to fall into afterwards. तो असल problem क्या होगा? If you do that, I think it should be fine. मसला नहीं होना चाहिए. As long as we're arguing के advantage or disadvantage में क्या position है. Maybe even like short run versus long run, you may be able to discuss in that. Um, like
Free trade is a separate topic, so you don't need to.
a separate topic, what?
Free trade is a separate topic, so you
Free
don't need to.
trade. Free trade is part of uh, international trade. It's part of specialization. एंड इसका बहुत जो रेगुलर डिस्कशन आता है दैट इज विद फ्री ट्रेड होना चाहिए कि प्रोटेक्शनिज्म होना चाहिए. सो इट्स वेरी कॉमनली मिक्स्ड अराउंड दीज टॉपिक्स. दो क्वेश्चंस जो अभी तक आइसोलेशन के अंदर आए हैं दैट दोज आर द वंस दैट आई एम शोइंग यू राइट नाउ. बाकी इसका प्रोटेक्शनिज्म के साथ ज्यादा एक कनेक्शन बनता है. लाइक फॉर एग्जाम्पल द क्वेश्चन ऑन द स्क्रीन. This was the second question जो अभी सबसे recently March के अंदर आया है. Which says assess whether the potential benefits of free trade always outweighs the arguments for protectionism. बल्कि ये भी नहीं, I should not do this. लेकिन no, I think I've opened the wrong question. ये तो वो है. Which year did I take this from? Wait, this is May June, not May June, March. Yeah. So March के अंदर आया है ना. Yeah, this one right here. Let me just show you with the marking scheme because it's all repetition anyways. Right. This is post standardization. So basically, if you look at the question, assess whether the consequences of free trade are always positive for an economy. So pretty much ये वही वाला question है which we've dealt with, but this one is a 12 marker. So for a 12 mark question, हमारे को we have to talk in terms of level 1, level 2, level 3. Okay. So number one, we have to show that we understand the term free trade. So I think I can just read from Bamford again कि जब हम फ्री ट्रेड की बात करते हैं तो we're saying when a country can export and import goods from another country without any government interference of taxes or limits on the quantity. So ये free trade का concept है. Obviously, you're not trading things for free in terms of money. All we're saying is you are not putting any kind of tariffs or limits or any kind of government intervention. You're allowed to buy and sell. ठीक है? So obviously you have to list down certain advantages. Try and explain as much as you can each and every point. You get a tick for each and every point. Like, for example, it says over here, how free trade may benefit an economy. This may include increased economic growth, reduction in unemployment, improved public finances, improved balance of payment. बहुत ही वेग तरीके से they've just given you the terms. You are expected to पूरी उसकी explanation. जैसे लास्ट क्वेश्चन के अंदर um, we did talk about the advantages. Let's break it down. Number one, we said there are certain advantages to consumers, right? Number one, free trade hoga to competition hoga. It's not mentioned over here, but I think these would be valid points also. So, number one, there's going to be competition, and competition will lead to lower prices. And when there are low prices, people's ability to buy is going to go up, which will improve their standard of living. Okay. Not only that, but people are going to get, because of trade, they're going to get more variety, better quality. But more importantly, free trade leads to more output, and more output means higher GDP, which leads to economic growth to go up. तो ये बहुत ही वेग लिखा हुआ है increased economic growth. You need to make connections to it. Okay. अब उसके अलावा जब फ्री ट्रेड होती है एंड compete करती हैं, न्यू फर्म्स हैपन, you basically get bigger markets in other countries. When you have bigger markets, you do get cost advantages, and you do large scale because you are doing large scale production, and you sometimes end up hiring more people, and so employment increases. ठीक है, that's how I'm making the connection. If it, how there is reduction in unemployment? Well, this is how there is reduction in unemployment. Unemployment falls, sorry. Right? So that's how you can make the connection. Improved public finances probably has to do with obviously when e- economic growth is happening, unemployment is falling. So naturally, we're saying that people's incomes are going to go up, because of which government tax collection will go up. And when government tax collection goes up, so now government can spend on important infrastructural, and government spending can go up on public goods and merit goods, and that can improve the overall structure of the economy. So thoda sa details, right? Improved balance of payment is a debatable one, but we can talk in terms of कि किस तरीके से exports are going to rise for a country. So that can lead to um, more exports leads to trade balance improving, or जब countries एक दूसरे में investments करेंगी, when they look at okay this country is progressing, तो हमें इसमें invest करनी चाहिए, तो financial account के अंदर you can see a lot of investments coming in, because remember multinational opens up in different countries looking for different resources based on factor endowments. So that can improve the trade balance. So I think इस तरीके से इसमें economy का word लिखा हुआ है. That is why I think they're using end result to be the macroeconomic objectives like economic growth and unemployment and BOP and things like that. But I think overall economy के अंदर you can talk about consumers and government and producers specifically also. All right, excuse me. Here, then you have to go for the drawbacks of free trade. When you are doing free trade, अभी हमने पीछे कुछ बातें की थी, which was about the over reliance on a particular industry, especially if that industry becomes obsolete, then businesses face and the country faces a lot of problems. Um, yeah, so that point is mentioned over here also. Okay, over reliance, there's an over reliance on other countries for goods not produced domestically and over reliance on certain industries. Sorry, let me just open that. तो दोनों तरीके से ये पॉइंट अच्छा है कि ओवर रिलायंस आपका एक्सपोर्ट पे भी हो जाता है और ओवर रिलायंस आपका इंपोर्ट पे भी हो जाता है तो आइदर वे इट इज प्रॉब्लमैटिक फॉर अ कंट्री उसके बाद we are also talking about if again your if situation hai if a country is exporting something cheap and importing a lot of other things then they may face balance of payment current account deficits. Now, just imagine last time I was saying that developed countries को advantage होता है, but if you look at US exports expensive stuff. Agreed. IT and manufactured maybe like Boeing and very expensive, sophisticated things they do. But all the other things they are importing from all over the world. So they have balance of payment deficits because their economy relies on a lot of imported stuff. So they have a consistent deficit. If USA was any other country, they would have all these balance of payment problems. The only reason why they don't feel that problem is because they have US dollars as their own currency, which is an international currency, and they have a printing press. Others don't. That's why others always keep a close eye on exports and imports and that balance. USA is the only country which does not have to worry about that problem. And it's only because of the dollars. Obviously, you don't need to write that, but just for general knowledge, I'm telling you that even developed countries can have a balance of payment deficit problems. And especially if it is in other currencies, they have to figure out a balance to earn that. जैसे पाकिस्तान का केस है because our everything that we import is in dollars, we don't have a dollars printing press. So we need to arrange dollars somehow or the other. So we have to borrow money. Same goes with India, same goes with all other countries. So you have to create an export in order to get that exchange rate coming into the country, right? तो ये हमारा हो गया एक आइडिया जो यहाँ पर बात हुई हुई है एक आइडिया स्ट्रक्चरल अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट when you are doing free trade and you specialize in a particular good अभी हमने लास्ट टाइम भी पिछले ऐसे में प्रॉब्लम डिस्कस किया द रन डाउन ऑफ अदर इंडस्ट्रीज एंड स्पेशली अगर आपकी जिस इंडस्ट्री पे आप डिपेंड करते हो फॉर एग्जांपल पाकिस्तान केस वी रिलाई हेविली वी यूज टू रिलाई एंड डू रिलाई हेविली ऑन टेक्सटाइल एंड एग्रीकल्चर अभी ये जो ईरान वॉर का प्रॉब्लम हुआ है उसकी वजह से हमारा जो एग्रीकल्चर साइड है उसका एक्सपोर्ट में थोड़ा सा प्रॉब्लम आ रहा है बिकॉज वी आर नॉट एबल टू एक्सपोर्ट दोज गुड्स टू द मिडिल ईस्टर्न इकोनॉमीज एंड यूएई तो उसकी वजह से हमारे पास एक बहुत बड़ा प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट हो गया है दैट there is an excess supply in the domestic market which is causing their prices to remain low especially अगर perishable हो तो अगर कल को we do lose some sort of advantage in these industries, so we're going to experience structural unemployment. Structural unemployment is because of the mismatch of demand and supply of a particular skill, uh, those people are now not employed anymore. जैसे हमारे यहाँ टेक्सटाइल में एक ये भरी चल रहा है कि हम, we're losing our comparative advantage because of the depletion of resource and जो भी वजह है. And so now we're losing the comparative advantage. And so as a result, we are facing structural unemployment in those industries. Why? Because the developed economies are interested in buying from people who are more specialized in these goods than us. So if somebody else becomes more specialized, you lose comparative advantage. And ये free trade के अंदर एक ये बड़ा problematic situation हो सकती है. Now just imagine, general knowledge के लिए, Western countries have always believed in free trade and they've been pushing the world towards free trade, especially the developing nations who never wanted free trade. We always wanted to protect our local industries because we knew we will not be able to survive. But हमें इन्होंने बोला कि आप फ्री ट्रेड करें, वर्ल्ड ट्रेड ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बनाई, उसका हिस्सा बनाया, एंड देन सेड आप सब फ्री ट्रेड में बिलीव रखें. Now the same countries, now that they have big deficits on their trade balances, now they themselves are putting barriers on countries which have become really good. Why? Because they are running deficits on them. So now they're saying कि हम तो protectionist policies लगाएंगे. And now when they're putting protectionist policies on country like, India and China and Pakistan and all, now these countries are getting hurt because they're like, अब हम किसको बेचेंगे ये products? So now they're facing falling economic growth. They are facing uh, all the challenges with it. तो ये मैं थोड़ा सा दूसरी realm के अंदर जा रहा हूँ protectionist policies की. So I don't want to discuss that right now, but general knowledge. Okay? फिर हम नीचे जाते हैं evaluation के अंदर. Consideration that fully assesses the consequences of free trade and arrives at a reasoned conclusion concerning whether it is always positive. It may include reference on availability of factor endowments, how open an economy is, the stage of development. Therefore, तीन चीजें जो हम previous essay में भी इसको include कर सकते हैं. Stage of development is sort of like dealing with developing versus developed. Okay? Developing versus developed. So, same argument. Then the next one is dealing with in your evaluation, if you discuss in terms of availability of factor endowments. If you have certain natural resources which nobody else has, it could be God gifted, natural ones, and it could be something that you've created, skillful one and technological one. For example, big companies want to go and produce batteries in China. Why do they want to do that? Mainly because of the factor endowments that they have the rare mineral earth plentiful, and they have the skilled labor and capital on a scale nobody else has. इसमें से एक natural है और human और capital developed है. तो दोनों complement करता है for them to specialize in that particular industry. But there could be countries which may have certain resources, but maybe not on such a large scale that they were benefiting in the beginning, but now they're losing their comparative advantage. So factor endowment deplete ho raha hai with specialization, and now they're losing their comparative advantage, and so they're getting competed out. ये भी हो सकता है. You can argue that. How open an economy is talking about कि आप कितना ज्यादा वर्ल्ड ट्रेड के अंदर पार्टिसिपेशन है. North Korea, zero participation. Iran, very little participation, but very important participation at the same time. USA, China, very large participation. Maldives, these islands, tourist islands, very large participation. कि इतनी बड़ी पार्टिसिपेशन कि अगर कोविड की लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल कोविड सिचुएशन ट्रैवल टूरिज्म स्टॉप्स द एंटायर कंट्री गोज इनटू प्रॉब्लम विद इन फ्यू मंथ्स राइट तो ये इट्स अबाउट द ओपननेस हाउ मच आर यू इन्वॉल्व इन द इंटरनेशनल इकोनॉमी ओके अगर you're a closed economy and something like Iran and COVID happens, not much is going to happen to you. Why? Because you're not part of international trade anyways. So it's not going to change your lives anyways. Your industries will perform the way they do. Not much of a change is likely to happen, right? Lekin, if, again, if you're an important part of the whole thing and you trade a lot, things like this is going to affect you a lot, you know. So this is what we say कि पाकिस्तान जब दुनिया के अंदर इस तरह का क्राइसिस आता है तो हमारे को भी जो इशू आया है हमारे एक्सपोर्ट्स में कोई मेजर इफेक्ट्स नहीं आएंगे लेकिन हमारा इंपोर्ट बिकॉज वी रिलाई अ लॉट ऑन इंपोर्टेड ऑयल we're going to face a lot of problems from the import wala side. So our balance of payment going to get problem. Then we're going to have imported inflation in the country. Then we're going to have unemployment, cost push, economic growth falls. So we're going to experience all these macroeconomic objectives. So I think these are good 3 points, Joe. I think you should learn about free trade. That it depends on what factors you have, how open your economy is, and what stage of development are you at. They're saying etc. Um, etc. के अंदर maybe like in the early stages versus later stages. ये भी stage of development के अंदर ही है. Like before finding comparative advantage, after finding comparative advantage. Kind of like उस तरह से. So I think this is how you're going to go about it. You have to be very cautious with the first part because remember, knowledge and understanding collectively is for 8 marks. To make sure that your advantages that you are writing, you have to have at least advantages and disadvantages के अंदर 8 points so that you can get 8 ticks in it. ठीक है? So that would be an important bit for you. Okay? तो ये हमारा हो जाता है sort of a free trade का discussion. Okay? Now, after that, I sort of want to have a little discussion, and I'll try to make it a quick discussion because I have done plenty of theories on this. Bamford के अंदर भी it's a reasonably small, there's not much in it, but जो relevant चीजें हैं मैं तुमको उसका करा देता हूँ protectionist policy के बारे में. एक तो 3 मार्कर के लिए आई थिंक ये बड़ा recent का क्वेश्चन है if I tell you. Yeah, I, I don't know why, but ये मैंने चेक किया है हमारे ही वेरिएंट के अंदर. So let me just exactly tell you कि हमारे वेरिएंट के अंदर ये कब आया है. There was a question in which they asked us कि protectionism क्या होता है? What is meant by protectionism? Yeah, June 24, 22 के अंदर आया था, and the question was explain what is meant by protectionism and consider the effectiveness of using tariffs as a method of protectionism. It's a good starting point for protectionism ka chapter. There was 3 marks to explain protectionism. I remember मेरे पुराने notes के अंदर तो I never used to even use the word protectionism. We used to always call it barriers to trade, right? But the correct word is protectionism. Okay? एंड ज्यादातर बच्चे क्या लिखते हैं प्रोटेक्शनिज्म क्या होता है भाई प्रोटेक्शनिज्म इज व्हेन गवर्नमेंट इम्पोजेस टैक्स ऑन इंपोर्टेड गुड्स टू रिड्यूस द इंपोर्ट्स राइट इसी तरह से एक वेग सी डेफिनेशन होती है इस पे ज्यादा क्या 1 मार्क मिल जाएगा बट एग्जामिनर वर ब्रूटल वी वर ब्रूटल व्हेन वी वर गिविंग मार्क्स फॉर दिस 3 marks was allotted for the definition, and I'll quote you Bamford's definition. The first mark was given when you explain protectionism is when government seeks to protect domestic industries, right? Now, one would say, obviously, domestic industries को प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए होता है एंड दे राइट ओनली दिस मच. वो मार्क जो अलॉट करना था वो भी नहीं हम अलॉट करेंगे बिकॉज इफ यू डोंट राइट दैट protect domestic industry against foreign industries, you don't get a mark. Although one would say that it's obvious, yeah, against the foreign countries, right? Domestic को और किससे protect करोगे? But if you don't write this, mark गया. Number two, restricts free trade. And number three, uh, increases price competitiveness of domestic industries. Exactly Bamford से copy paste हुई हुई थी ये definition in your marking scheme, and you have to write these three things about protectionism. Otherwise, there's no mark. उसने बोला explain the meaning of protectionism. A lot of students, they just gave a vague definition and then they gave some examples like tariffs and quotas and all. Again, these are different policies. There are about 5 policies which is being discussed in Bamford. One is tariff, one is quotas, export subsidies, embargoes, and red tapism, which is administrative burdens. हमें पता है जब प्रोटेक्शनिज्म के अंदर प्रोटेक्शनिस्ट पॉलिसीज के अंदर जब हम टैरिफ्स लगाते हैं तो टैरिफ का डायग्राम इन आवर थ्योरीज में तो बहुत ज्यादा इसको डिफरेंटली एक्सप्लेन करते हैं हम बट योर मेन डायग्राम दैट वी हैव इन दिस वन इज कि आप इस तरीके से एक डायग्राम बनाते हैं आप डोमेस्टिक डिमांड डोमेस्टिक सप्लाई प्लीज ऑलवेज टैरिफ्स के लिए आप यही बनाएंगे domestic supply. And again, if they ask for a diagram, if they don't ask for a diagram, there's no need to make these. All right. Diagram मांगा है तो फिर आप बनाएंगे ये. Domestic demand, domestic supply. Um, the world price is obviously below it. That's why you are importing. ये आपकी world supply हो जाती है. Obviously, world supply के ऊपर the amount of import will be this much. जब आप इसके ऊपर टैरिफ्स लगाएंगे तो टैरिफ्स लगाने के बाद ये ऊपर की तरफ चला जाएगा डिपेंडिंग ऑन द साइज ऑफ द टैरिफ. आप इवैल्यूएशन में टैरिफ का डिस्कशन कर सकते हैं कि आप वर्ल्ड प्राइस पे कितना टैरिफ लगाना चाहते हैं. उससे क्वांटिटी सप्लाई इंक्रीज हो जाती है, डोमेस्टिक प्रोड्यूसर्स बेनिफिट बट कंज्यूमर्स लूज आउट एंड दे लीव. एंड जो इनिशियल इंपोर्ट क्वांटिटी थी, by raising the price of imported goods, you increased your competitiveness and you reduced the import. ये आपकी वर्ल्ड सप्लाई विद टैरिफ हो गई. राइट ये हमारा की कॉन्सेप्ट था इसके अंदर. आई विल अपलोड द लेक्चर्स ऑन द सेम प्लेलिस्ट if you want to go into the details of tariffs, quotas, and subsidies का diagram. But the key explanation over here जो उस क्वेश्चन के अंदर आपने करनी थी कि effectiveness of tariff, the first thing you have to explain is tariff होता क्या है. Tariff is a tax imposed on imported goods. Government earns revenue. Government discourages imported goods. इसकी इफेक्टिवनेस की बात करते हैं तो इट डिपेंड्स ऑन द इलास्टिसिटी ऑफ द गुड्स. अगर गुड्स आर इनइलास्टिक तो इंपोर्ट्स के अंदर जो है कोई ज्यादा रिडक्शन नहीं आएगा आफ्टर टैरिफ्स. लेकिन अगर गुड्स इलास्टिक हैं तो देयर इज गोइंग टू बी अ बिगर रिडक्शन इन द टैरिफ्स. तो आप उसका डिस्कशन कर सकते हैं. अच्छा, एक एक्सपोर्ट पे टैरिफ की भी बात होती है. आई डोंट नो इफ यू हर्ड, लाइक जैसे अभी रिसेंटली इतने प्रॉब्लम जब हो रहे थे, डिफरेंट कंट्रीज व्हाट दे डिसाइड इज व्हेन दे हैव लाइक फूड शॉर्टेजेस और ऑयल शॉर्टेजेस और गैस शॉर्टेजेस, तो कंट्रीज एक्सपोर्ट पे टैरिफ लगा देती हैं. That if you want to export something from the country, you will have to pay a tax on it as a domestic producer. Obviously, this is to discourage people from exporting the good. Same concepts happens. Because of that, less will be exported because आपकी profits कम हो जाएंगे. तो मुल्क को आप बेसिकली प्रोटेक्ट करने की कोशिश करते हैं. So export tariffs can also act as a form of protectionism. This is because if they place on raw material like oil and gas or timber or food items, they can protect the domestic industries that use those raw material. जैसे ऑस्ट्रेलिया ने आयरन ओर के ऊपर लगा दिया था ऑन जापान, टुवर्ड्स जापान. सो उससे जो है इट रेज द स्टील प्राइसेस इन जापान. उससे इंटरनेशनल कंपेटिटिवनेस जो है वो कम हो गई थी. उसी तरह से यू हैव इंपोर्ट कोटास. ओके, इंपोर्ट कोटा का भी वही होता है, लेकिन इंपोर्ट कोटा इज अ फिजिकल लिमिट. ओके, इट रिस्ट्रिक्ट्स द क्वांटिटी, इट ड्राइव्स अप द प्राइसेस. अगेन आई विल अपलोड द डायग्राम. इसी डायग्राम का एक एक्सटेंडेड वर्जन मैं कोटा का कराता हूँ. सो आई विल अपलोड दैट. उसके अंदर डोमेस्टिक सप्लाई के अंदर हम कोटा ऐड कर देते हैं तो सप्लाई इंक्रीजेज एंड देन द प्राइस राइजेज. डू टेक अ लुक एट दैट. एंड देन एक्सपोर्ट सब्सिडीज, जिससे डोमेस्टिक सप्लाई बढ़ती है एंड इंपोर्ट रिड्यूसेस. आई विल शेयर दैट विद यू. तो प्लीज डू टेक अ लुक at those ones. Okay, I don't want to waste too much time on this. Essays में आएगा तो I will deal with that. One of the most important ones that we want to deal with is arguments for and against. Okay, for protectionism and against protectionism. Against protectionism is basically free trade. The argument. Okay, there are a few very important policies. But the main ones we want you to discuss, and mostly kids do know it, तो इसलिए मैं सिर्फ बेसिक आपको बताऊंगा. Number one, to protect infant industries. Infant industries are also your sunrise industries. These are industries you have not found comparative advantage in as yet. They need protection against the strong, developed industries from foreign countries. They're not going to let you survive. So either you give your industries subsidy or you put tariffs on them so that they become less competitive, right? तो कॉन्सेप्ट क्या है? Brand new industries haven't found comparative advantage, may become important in the future. Let's protect them. Okay. Second, to protect declining industries. Declining industries are those in which we are losing comparative advantage. इसको आप sunset industries भी कहते हैं. We are losing comparative advantage in this. Why? Because of depletion of resource, because of better technologies have come up, somebody else has become better, your product has become obsolete. But point is, you're losing your comparative advantage. Now, you want to protect those industries because a lot of massive structural unemployment will come. जैसे पाकिस्तान में टेक्सटाइल को हमको प्रोटेक्ट करना पड़ता है, एग्रीकल्चर में कुछ सर्टेन इंडस्ट्रीज को प्रोटेक्ट करना पड़ता है, बिकॉज इफ यू डोंट प्रोटेक्ट देम then foreign competition is going to give them losses and the country is going to lose out. The thing is, Efficient wise, it's a bad idea to do that. इसमें हम आर्ग्यूमेंट करते हैं कि शॉर्ट रन में यू कैन प्रोटेक्ट देम, टेलिंग देम कि शॉर्ट रन के अंदर या तो आप अपने आप को एफिशिएंट बनाओ या आप रिसोर्सेज को मूव कर लो टू समथिंग एल्स, राइट? तो in the long run, it's not a good one because then you promote inefficiency. Because if you keep on protecting them, your these industries will never improve themselves. Third most important is uh, to prevent dumping. Dumping is a concept. First, आप define करेंगे dumping होती क्या है? Dumping is a situation where a foreign company may practice uh, with like an unfair competition. Dumping involves selling product at below their cost price. In the short run, it may benefit. जैसे अभी तुम notice करना, in the coming year, Chinese industries are going to be dumping a lot of goods globally. We haven't heard this news as yet, but Chinese economy is imploding, meaning they have very large industries depending on exports. Over the last few years, ever since these tariffs and now the war, problem is all these big industries, there's not much global demand for their products, and now these large businesses are not able to sustain. They're shutting down. Workers are getting unemployed. Wages are falling. Companies who have stock, they are dumping their products. ये जो पूरी global economy के अंदर we're seeing that the Chinese cars are coming in. Right now, we're thinking, oh, Chinese make products at cheap rate. That's why their cars are so cheap and we can buy them so cheap. The thing is, the Chinese are producing it in very large quantities. They have, I don't know how many, easily more than like 30 big, giant size. BYD is just like a small company in their entire arsenal of EV cars. तो ये कंपनीज अब ग्लोबल मार्केट्स में जाके दे आर सेलिंग दीज कार्स, दे गेटिंग इनटू दीज मार्केट्स somehow or the other, कि किसी तरीके से we make space in these markets and we just go that extra mile to sustain ourselves. Once these economies become dependent on us, then we can sell them our parts at high prices because now they're dependent and we have the advantage. So, aaj nahi to kal, all these in 5 years down the road, when these EVs are going to start getting problems and parts and issues, we will have to pay a premium to the Chinese, those companies who will survive. By the way, इसमें से बहुत सारी companies अभी survive करेंगी भी नहीं. So be mindful of what Chinese company cars are you buying, because maybe in like few years, many of them will not even survive this. What is happening? News is not coming out of China, but things are not good. You should, I think, YouTube के ऊपर China Observer and these kinds of there are local channels. You should watch those. You will get good insight on what is going on. It's one of the major industries in the world, in major countries in the world, right? तो yeah, ये तीन आपकी major discussions हैं. But then you do have discussions like the strategic industries. You should put tariffs on these industries so that you become self-reliant. Iran is one good case of that. How in the 70s, when they were sanctioned so much, they became heavily reliant on their own food and medicine and weapon and all. तो आज हमें उनका रिजल्ट नजर आ रहा है after 30-40 years that they have actually done a pretty good job in their strategic industries. So that could be one of the reasons. There are more reasons. A balance of payment का deficit ठीक करने के लिए, terms of trade को improve करने के लिए, या to impact those, आप tariffs हटा सकते हो, लगा सकते हो. So these are some of those arguments which I will make when I'll deal with the essays. लेकिन as far as argument against goes, उसमें सिंपल सी बात है, रिटेलिएशन हो सकता है ग्लोबल मार्केट से, आपके पास चॉइस रिस्ट्रिक्शन हो सकती है, क्वालिटी रिस्ट्रिक्शन हो सकती है, इनएफिशिएंसी हो सकती है. तो दैट्स व्हाई यू वांट टू गो अगेंस्ट, बिकॉज फ्री ट्रेड हैज सर्टेन एडवांटेजेस, जिसमें कॉस्ट एडवांटेजेस होते हैं, क्वालिटी, क्वांटिटी, प्राइस, trade war avoidance, dependency on each other, ताकि war ना हो. It was so easy to go against Iran. Why? Because कोई फॉरेन कॉरपोरेशन ही नहीं है उनको प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए. बट इट विल बी सो डिफिकल्ट टू गो इनटू वॉर अगेंस्ट द चाइनीज because there are so many corporations over there. Or even like Pakistan, we have a lot of multinationals from abroad. It is difficult for these countries to go in war. ये जो recent times के अंदर पाकिस्तान के अंदर बहुत सारी corporations बंद हुई हैं, if जो बाहर की companies are leaving Pakistan, one of the things we should be worrying about is not just that there's a lot of capital which is leaving. We should be worried we will become a very much um, vulnerable to these kind of international sanctions and attacks in the future, because once they leave, there will be no more foreign companies in these countries to lobby for us. So it will become, at least like it will become easier for them to attack us also. तो ये भी एक बड़ी dependency, you want to create dependency by allowing these corporations to come into the country, right?